Hi, everybody. It's Janet with Fruit of the Vine Art Studio, and it's Wednesday, and it's 8 o'clock, and it's the 1st of July. So during the month of July, every Wednesday at 8 p.m., we're going to retell a story from the greatest book ever written. And this is the second in our series. Last week we did Noah and the Amazing Ark. Now this week we have a different story, and this is going to be the story of Daniel. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this story, but in this story we're going to explore friendship and faith, the friendship between a king and a God-fearing man. There's also two jealous men who wanted to end that friendship with an unjust law. Oh, but there is more. There's an angel and a bunch of hungry lions. Now, doesn't that sound exciting? Oh, it's going to be. Well, get ready, because without further ado, this is a bit of a long story, so we're going to get started right now. A long time ago, there was a king named Darius. Darius became the king when he and his armies won the battle over Belshazzar, and then they entered Babylon. Darius was a very powerful king in a very big territory, so he appointed 120 men to be leaders, and they were called satraps, which is kind of like a governor, and we're going to call them governors in our story. And then he had 3 men that he appointed as like vice presidents, and we're going to call them administrators in this story. So, seeing as how the kingdom was very large and there was only one king, King Darius felt that he needed help overseeing the vast lands of Babylon. So the men were hired to keep watch over different territories while the king was busy. Now, one of the administrators was named Daniel. Now, King Darius and Daniel were very good friends. Although both of them came from very different lifestyles, they formed a very strong friendship. Darius was a man from Persia who commanded an army, and Daniel was from Jerusalem, a place where he had lived with God's people for many years before and Daniel was a faithful and religious man who loved God very much. As one of the administrators, Daniel had a very good reputation with the king. And because of his wondrous reputation, King Darius planned to put Daniel in charge of the whole country. The king knew that Daniel was a very good worker and was trustworthy, so he felt that Daniel was completely able to handle this job. Now, the other 2 administrators, they were so mad when they heard about Daniel, and they didn't like that plan of the king at all. Excuse me, we gotta flip the page. They were jealous. And they were jealous because the king thought Daniel was an excellent man with a wonderful reputation. So they set out to find something that would get Daniel in trouble with the king. They wanted him to get fired. But Daniel was a good man, and he obeyed God. So they couldn't find anything that he was doing wrong. But they kept watching. There would come a day, they thought, or a time, when Daniel might not be honest in his work. Or maybe he might take some coins that didn't belong to him. Or they might even catch him sleeping when he should be watching over the kingdom. They watched, and they couldn't find anything. It made them so aggravated that they couldn't find anything wrong with Daniel's behavior. They wanted him to look bad, and they thought about it. And they finally came to the realization that the only way they could make Daniel look bad was if they could make him break one of his God's laws. They knew he was a faithful man, But he was also friends with the king. And the only way they could get him to do something against the king was if it was a sin against his God. And as everyone knew, he was faithful to his religion. Now one day, one of the administrators said to the other, "We can't find anything for the king to fire Daniel over. The only way we can get him to make the king angry would be to make a new law that Daniel will not follow." Well, now you may have heard the old saying, one bad apple don't spoil the whole bunch. Well, that's only true if you remove the bad apple. If you don't, the rotten fruit, or that bad apple, it's going to spoil all the other apples in the basket if it's left too long. Now in the Bible, it tells us that bad company corrupts good character. And this is in 1 Corinthians 15:33. What exactly does that mean? It means that we need to be careful with whom we make friends or listen to. A person with bad intentions will eventually affect you and the decisions that you make. So the two administrators called together all of the governors in that kingdom, and they told them of their plan to bring Daniel down. They wanted so badly to bring Daniel down that they began to badmouth or talk poorly about Daniel. They came up with a big plan and got the other governors all pumped up about their evil plan. They had convinced the other governors that Daniel was a bad person who needed to be dealt with. The administrator's bad character had a negative influence on the governors. They were able to convince people that knew Daniel to go along. So, next, they decided they needed to spread their negativity to the king. Their actions and their words, basically being gossips and spreading lies, that had caused others to sin against God as they tried to hurt Daniel in the process. So now they went to King Darius and they said, "May King Darius live forever, O great king. You are so wonderful that no one should ever pray to anybody else but you. You are such a good king that you should make a law that says nobody is allowed to pray to anyone but you for the next 30 days. Now imagine how King Darius must have felt on that day. All of his appointed governors and administrators showing up before him with flattering words. He must have felt pretty good that day to have a large group of his men suggesting that all the people in the kingdom would pray only to him for the next 30 days. He was flattered, and it sounded like a wonderful plan. He was lost in his own pride. The king said, "That sounds like a great idea." And then the two evil administrators continued with their plot, and they told the king that all the workers had agreed that this be done, and that anyone that prays to any other god should be thrown into the lion's den. Now, had Darius not been caught up in his pride at that moment, he may have noticed that there was something wrong with the law. During his reign, if a law was made, it could not be changed. So you would think that most kings would think long and hard before they enacted a new law. But King Darius, he was just so caught up in the moment that he lacked discernment on that day. What is discernment, you may ask? Well, simply put, it means good judgment. The king that day made a snap decision without using his good judgment. And if King Darius had practiced good judgment that day, he would have seen through that wicked scheme. But he didn't stop to think about the consequences of this unchangeable law. The administrators had lied, and they said that everyone who worked for the king had agreed. But the truth was, they hadn't talked to Daniel, because they knew that he wouldn't agree to this. But King Darius, he didn't know this, so he wrote out the law and he signed it, and then he sealed it, which made it unchangeable. What was written must now take place, and no one, not even the king, could change this. So, when Daniel heard the news about the new law, he knew he had a problem. So he did what he always did. He went home, and he opened his window that faced Jerusalem, and he got down on his knees to pray. He gave thanks to God, and he asked God to help him. Daniel decided to continue to pray, even if it meant he might end up with the lions. Daniel was faithful, and he didn't let anything keep him from praying. In fact, he did this 3 times a day, every day. Now, little did Daniel know, but while he was praying, the 2 evil administrators came to the house, and they saw that he was praying to his God. Now, can you imagine how happy they must have been? Finally, after all this time and all their evil deeds, they had Daniel right where they wanted him. They danced with glee as they ran off to go tattle the king about Daniel. They rushed into the king, and they said, "Oh, great king, your worker Daniel is ignoring your new law. We watched him 3 times pray to his God with our own eyes." Now, just think what King Darius must have thought. King Darius was very troubled. He knew Daniel. He knew he was a faithful man with an excellent reputation. He probably wanted to kick himself for falling for the trick of those 2 evildoers. I'm sure he wished that he hadn't made that crazy law in the first place. And to top it off, then they reminded King Darius, I gotta get some air, it's hot. Then they reminded King Darius that he could not break his own law, and that Daniel now had to be punished by putting him into the lion's den. Darius knew he had made a mistake, and he couldn't change the law because of his lack of good judgment and from allowing others to influence him. Darius worked hard through the day trying to figure out a way to save Daniel. But knowing there was no other choice, Darius ordered Daniel be thrown into the lion's den. And at the end of the day, King Darius, he waited until they brought Daniel, and as they passed, he said to Daniel, "I hope your God, whom you continually serve, will rescue you." They threw Daniel in, and they rolled a very large stone over the front of the lion's den. King Darius went back to the palace with tears in his eyes. That evening, the king was wrought with worry. The beautiful dancing maids were sent back to their rooms. The feast went uneaten, the wine not poured. King Darius could not sleep. Now, beyond this, we don't know exactly what he did, but I bet he paced back and forth in his room. He may even have prayed to Daniel's God to rescue his friend. And as the sun rose, King Darius ran to the lion's den, and he saw that the stone over the mouth of the den was still sealed, and that no one had come to save Daniel in the night. He called out in anguish, "Daniel, has your God, whom you continually serve, saved you from the lions?" He stood and he listened. The king ordered that the rock that was sealing the mouth of the lion's den to be moved. And all of a sudden, King Darius heard Daniel say, "O king, live forever. My God sent an angel during the night, and he sealed the mouths of the lions shut. They have not hurt me, as I have done nothing wrong in his sight, nor have I wronged you, O king." King Darius couldn't believe his ears. How could a man have lived through an entire night in a den of hungry lions and still come out alive? King Darius then saw God's power and the protection that had been given to Daniel by being rescued from the mouths of the lions. The king was so overjoyed that Daniel had lived through the night that he ordered him pulled out of the den. And when he saw Daniel, there wasn't a scratch on him, not a mark, because Daniel trusted in God. King Darius knew that he had been tricked by those 2 evildoers. So he punished them and made sure that they suffered the same fate that they had planned for Daniel. Now, after this, King Darius wrote a new law. And that law said Daniel's God is great, and everyone in this kingdom must honor and respect Daniel's God. He became a believer in God because he was influenced by Daniel's faithful behavior to God, and that his God had blessed him with the protection from those lions. After that, King Darius praised God before his people. We see in this story how our character influences others around us. We see the positive influence with Daniel because of his good reputation and his faithfulness. This helped him gain influence with King Darius, who later turned to God because of Daniel and his faithfulness. Now, in this story, we also see negative influence in the two evil administrators who set out to bring Daniel down. Their negative influence convinced those around them to join in and agree. The same negative influence convinced King Darius to enact an unjust law. Now, if you're trying to be a good influence, it is important that you ask God to help you stop any bad habits or change any bad attitude that you might have, so that you could be a positive influence on others and others who may be watching you as their example. Now, thanks for listening. And once again, this fantastic story comes from God's Word, the Bible. It can be found in the book of Daniel, and that would be chapter 6, verses 1 to 28. Now, let's read verse 27 from that book before we go. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and in earth. Who had delivered Daniel from the power of the lions? Our God. And as a further Bible study, you're going to find questions below in our comments section about this story that you just heard to help you review the story. I do hope that you enjoyed the story and that you're going to join me here next week for another exciting tale from the greatest book ever written. And here I just want to show you our picture. Here's Daniel in the lion's den. And you can see King Darius, and it's morning, and he's so happy to see that his friend Daniel is still alive in the morning. All right, guys. I hope to see you next week, Wednesday at 8 o'clock, for another exciting story here on Fruit of the Vine Art Studio. Thanks for watching. Bye.